My guest this week is Soma Miller, an embodied men's coach who helps men refine and feel more confident in their masculinity as they walk out their relationships, their careers, and how they serve the community on this week's episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. With me today is Soma Miller. Soma, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Mm-hmm. Soma is a embodied men's coach. So you mentor men in basically creating a healthier sense of masculinity. They have more, integrity in the way they approach their life, their relationships, their careers, and how they feel about themselves. Is that an adequate or close description of what you do?
I think it's really good, and I that word comes up a lot in the work that I do, integrity, right? And it's one of these words there's certain definitions of it that's kind of ties into morality, and that's not necessarily my take on integrity. At the root of it is the word integral, which means whole, right? So
yes.
So it's looking at ourselves as whole, like our whole beings, and how that sense of who we are is also integrating into how we choose to live our lives, and if there is alignment there,
right.
And what I mean by alignment is like, are we as men tapped into our core values as like a guiding force in our lives? And I think that's a big piece that comes up in the beginning with this work, because a lot of men's compass is like oriented on how society wants them to be, or how they were told to be growing up, or who they were told that they were growing up, right? So a big part of the work is like getting men back in touch with their truth, right? Which is, to me, their integrity, and starting to make choices that align with that.
Gotcha. Well, I think there's a lot of confusion around masculinity and the man's role right now, because like you said, for decades we've had this very, if you want to call it macho, but a very tough but not vulnerable man with very little emotional intelligence, who just pushed through everything, didn't take care of himself, probably was not great with relationships or communicating, and put on a big front even for other guys, put a big front on. And that, speaking for myself, that was not appealing to me growing up as something I wanted to be. On the other end, we have an attack on masculinity where we start to see blurring the lines between masculinity and femininity, where there's a less binary approach to man, or being a guy, being a man. And so it's really can be confusing if you're kind of growing up in this and just a teenager or 20 something, and you're trying to figure out, how am I supposed to be perceived? How am I supposed to behave? How do I talk to a woman when on one side you have hyper confident, obnoxious, the other side you've got super passive and a little bit needy. And
right.
And so I guess I see the need to redefine this, with refine it, with the emotional intelligence, but yet not losing that polarity with women.
Yeah, and I like that word refine in there, because in a way, maybe there's nothing new, right? Maybe we're just taking a piece of this and a piece of that, and seeing really what version of masculinity is fitting the need of our current culture, and that's it's one way of looking at it, right? Is like, what's actually needed, because what I believe most men themselves need is a sense of purpose, right? And
for sure.
And this is a core piece of the work that I do also, because a lot of our culture has conditioned men to be you know, in this kind of narcissistic focus on like what's good for me, right? And that version of masculinity, we can see the impact of that. You know, it's you know, from a certain lens of this work, we look at it as like the first stage of masculinity, where it's like it's kind of my way or the highway, right? Like that kind of
Right.
macho jerk thing. And so to me, part of that refinement, not that we don't have our personal needs as men, and sometimes it is about our needs, but it's also looking at like what is needed in the world, right? Like what is
Right.
the world asking for, so that collectively we can, you know, evolve or move our culture forward for the greater good, right? And you know, I think it's a big pivot for a lot of guys, is shifting from this self-focus, like how can I be better just for me so I can get my own needs met, to being driven by something bigger than the self, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I agree, there's confusion about what it means to be a man. And you know, personally, I don't claim to know what it means to be a man. I don't have the answer to that. You know, I don't want to be the one defining that. For me, I'm actually supporting men to define that for themselves, right? To define what it means for them, because I think there is a lot greater of a spectrum available right now. And in some ways that's a good thing, right? Like how men can show up and be more vulnerable, and you know, go beyond just the tough stoic version of masculinity that a lot of us grew up with. And so it's, you know, it's not really an either or, right? It's more about there, it could be useful for a lot of guys to develop different capacities in themselves, so that they have more available to work with, to live with, to offer through, you know, their transmission of what it means to be a man in the world. And so there's no right way about that, but the way I'd like to look at it is like, what is the impact we're having, right, on the people that are around us? Because to me, the world is, if we're receptive enough to see and have the capacity for that kind of feedback, we can start to take in the impact we're having, right? And that's where sensitivity is a good thing. But it can go too far, right? Like some men are so overly concerned with their impact that they're kind of in this paralysis, right? They're so afraid of like getting it wrong. And because, you know, masculinity is sort of in the spotlight of, you know, the last several years of like the Me Too movement, and, you know, this sort of call out culture that we're in the midst of, it's like, you know, there's this sense of like, oh wait, I can't do this and I can't do that. And it creates a bit of a paralysis for men. And so, so from there, it's like, to me, it's creating the space for men to not only have awareness of their impact, but also to have the kind of courage and tenacity to, you know, not necessarily need to get it right all the time, you know, to not like, because again, it creates this kind of frozenness where men don't feel like they can actually be who they are. And so they're kind of living in this restricted kind of, you know, disembodied experience of life in a way. Yeah, I mean, I kind of went off on that, but I just want to invite any questions.
I think that's
around
perfect.
that.
Yeah, it's true, because you said there's a spectrum of where you can lie where it's going to work for you based on the needs that you have around you and your personality, because we're not all the same. We're not supposed to look the same or act the same. We all have different strengths. So there's a spectrum there, but there's a lot of confusion, as you mentioned, around what that's supposed to look like. And so purpose, I found, is huge for men. And if they don't have a purpose, whether they're on the young side of their life and they have no idea what they're good at, what their strengths are, where they're going with their life, or they're on the opposite end of their life and their career's done, they've retired, they've been let go for whatever reason, and suddenly they have no, now they really have no purpose ahead of them, and their life is got a few, number of years left. They know they're on the other side of the hill, and
Mhm.
when that purpose is gone, oh my gosh, we're lost. We're lost without purpose. We're lost without a target, without something to go
Mhm.
after, truly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Um, and at the same time, like, you know, men here's another place where I see men getting kind of tripped up is, you know, a lot of men at some point recognize that having a purpose is a good thing, right? That they
Right.
need some kind of direction. And this is also where I see a lot of paralysis coming in, is like, um, you know, not knowing what their purpose is, and then just kind of like beating themselves up because
Sure.
they don't have some like ultimate, this is what my life is about.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think we can find purpose in so many different things. And, you know, this idea that there's one purpose to a man's life is something that I don't try to encourage. I mean, that may be true for some men, but if it creates this sense of anxiety in a man
Mhm.
to the point where um, he feels like even more depressed because he knows that he should have a purpose, but he doesn't know what it is, it becomes a problem, right? And so I do agree that purpose is good because it starts to create direction, right? and
Mhm.
and it is maybe more of our natural masculine biological wiring to, like, be direction oriented, right? That's part of
Mhm.
the masculine energy.
For sure.
And so that can start small, though, and it can start with, rather than a purpose, maybe there's like a mission, right? And maybe they're like, and that could be like to get your health dialed in for a little while, right? Just having something to focus on that, ideally creates some sense of deeper fulfillment, right?
Mhm.
But that could be enough for a little while, right? And then at a certain point, maybe that gets old, right? Maybe that's no longer giving you the fulfillment that it once did. And then it's okay to like choose something else, right? Um,
Gotcha.
and and so I just want to speak a little bit more to how we can create direction. And like I said earlier, a lot of it's about our values, right? And starting to get aligned with them, right? Which means making choices and setting boundaries. So, let's say you realize that, I'm just going to keep bringing this one in because I know this is related to the work you do, is like you decide that, health and wellness is a value, right? And um, and you you have these choices that you get to make every single day, right? You can choose to, when you're at the grocery store, to buy a bunch of stuff with, sugar and MSG and whatever else in it, right? All kinds of preservatives. And you can choose, or you can choose to just to buy whole foods, right? Things that are
Mhm.
actually going to nourish your body. And these are these choice points we get to make every single day, right? And just doing that, just saying yes to something that's aligned with our values and no to the things that are not, starts to create direction, right? Starts to
Mhm.
move us forward. So, I think there is a deep connection between our values and our purpose. And sometimes it does take time to sift through how we've been programmed and find our true values, right? To get over the fear and the conditioning and all the other stuff that has us choose things that are not aligned. So, and that is some of the work that I do.
Gotcha. So I imagine that you come up against, because sometimes in the face of whether it's trauma or in a lack of direction, we develop bad habits or even addictions. So I'd imagine you're dealing with a lot of guys with unhealthy addictions, whether it's alcohol or whatever it is, that things that are, or just have bad, really bad habits, or their social life, or the kind of women they might be attracted to or going after. I mean, so if you could speak to that a little bit, I mean, how do you address those? I mean, do you try to look for a root cause, or do you try to divert the energy to a more positive direction? I mean, how do you address that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's both. So, like you said, often our self-destructive behaviors, Gabor Mate, who's like a trauma specialist, talks about this a lot, how addiction is really directly related to the traumas that we experienced. And so the reason why we have addictive tendencies, and there's a spectrum of this, right? You can be heroin addict, alcoholic, but you can also be addicted now to like social media. You can be addicted to sugar, all these different things. Some people may not consider them addictions. I do. The way I would define addiction, again, there's extremes of this, but it's whatever we use to dissociate from our bodies in the moment, right? Because we're uncomfortable with feeling something. So, if you think about any time that maybe you've gotten to a habit of something negative in your life, if you really get down to the source of the moment that you chose that thing, most likely it's going to connect to like, I don't feel good right now and I want to escape,
Right.
And it's not usually a conscious choice. It's just like a reflex, right? And so it's important, number one, to sort of find those moments, like those moments of dissociation where like, I'm not okay with being right here, right now in the moment. So a lot of it's about our presence, right? How willing are we to meet the moment with our full presence, which means we're not only being present with what's in front of us, but also with what's inside of us. And so why I call myself an embodied men's coach is because, our emotional experience, our sensational experience all occurs in our body, right? And so our bodies are the vehicle to be present, it's how we meet the moment. And everything else is kind of like a reversion to a past behavioral coping mechanism, right? So, and these things start early on. Like we could have a adverse childhood experience where maybe like, it was a stressful moment at home and our dad yelled at us, right? And during these really the early childhood development, like the first 7 years when our brains are really developing, like these kind of imprints, they form our basis for reality in a way. They form how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And so, in that stressful moment with dad where he's like, shut the fuck up. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear here, but I guess you can edit
Yeah, we're good. We're usually not kids.
that. Your body contracts, right? Because it feels threatened, it goes into that primal fight or flight response. Like, I'm not safe here. And so, if that happens enough, or if it's a strong enough experience, then that stays with us. It like literally stays in our nervous system tissue, in our bodies. So over many, many years, like any kind of experience that on some subconscious level reminds us of that moment, it's likely that we're going to kind of contract, and so, trauma is like more about how we respond to an experience than, anything specific. So how we responded in that moment will likely play itself back on loop for a whole lifetime until we get conscious of it, right? And so, a big part of what I consider our work to do as men is about consciousness, like creating consciousness around these behavioral patterns that not only feed into addictions, like I said earlier, like these reactive impulses that have us want to leave the moment and take us out of presence, but they're also our wounds also will re-wound in a way. Like our triggers tend to want to act out the same way that we were hurt. So if you were kind of abused by your father, there's going to be a part of you where that's your learned behavior, right? So you have to rewire that. You have to rewire that reactivity, and it's not easy, especially because not only do we have our family of origin traumas and wounds, but we have our cultural wounds, our cultural conditioning around, how we're supposed to show up as men. And many of us have been socialized around like emotional suppression, right? Not allowing ourselves to feel sad or grief or, certain emotional expression. And so that causes problems too, right? And that's also often an avenue to addiction and dissociation, right? Because we, if we're feeling, angry ourselves and told anger is not safe, or we learned that anger wasn't safe, we're going to shut that down, right? Or if we're feeling sadness and we were told men don't cry, then we're going to shut that down. And great ways to shut that down are substances, social media, pornography, all kinds of stuff, right? So yeah,
self-medicating with all those things.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Exactly.
So so would you bring someone when they feel that way? What would be when they feel that desire to medicate, what would the alternative be? I mean, obviously they're in an uncomfortable moment or a vulnerable moment or a place where they feel very, I'll say small, but I guess vulnerable is a good word, where they just suddenly feel like they're not in charge of the situation, or they feel they're unable to overcome it, maybe.
Yeah. So and I know you already kind of asked that, so I'll try to finish the response to that. So there's different ways of working with it. Number one, you need awareness, right? And awareness is like a muscle, right? So one of the best ways to build the muscle of awareness is meditating, right? So there's the one way of looking at awareness is it's the gap between stimulus and response, right? And so So what meditating does is it helps to widen that gap, so you can even become conscious of these really, really deep habits, right? They're literally like wired into your neurology. So so you know, you're not going to generally be able to catch yourself unless you develop that muscle of awareness. Once you have that, and that's usually the point that men come to work with me. Like I'm not usually working with men that are like deep in addiction. Not that I'm opposed to it, but these are men that usually have enough self-awareness to recognize, oh, this shit isn't working for me,
Right.
and I need to make a change. And so, yeah, so number one is like building that muscle of awareness. Number two is connecting with yourself in that moment of leaving your body, right? So this could be something that I guide a man back to, like one of those moments. And there's, we can either help him to feel the feeling of whatever it was he was trying not to feel, which is, in a way, one way of looking at this is it's almost like there's a metabolism of our emotions, right? So if we're able to be present with them and to breathe and to feel them fully, they're going to start to dissipate. Like the emotional charge will start to dissolve. So that's a big piece, right? Because
Sure.
the emotion was actually the thing driving the addiction. So once we start to learn how to be with those emotions, there's going to be less need or desire to reach for these things.
Dissipate the fear.
And yeah, if it's fear, if it's anxiety, stress, whatever the thing is, right? It could be grief. And so another way that I work with men sometimes is to do a type of shadow work, where, because sometimes we actually suppress parts of ourselves. So, and they could be emotional parts, but they could just be kind of fragmented parts of our healthy ego, right? So, like a lot of men have these, like, part of them that's still like a wounded boy, that's still kind of carrying around these experiences that happened in childhood, and again, like relating to the world from that place versus being current with his emotions and his experience. So sometimes I'll do work where we'll actually lead him to get in touch with, I mean, you've probably heard of like inner child work, right?
Sure.
It's kind of more of a new agey term, but it is literally that. Like there's stunted parts of our personality that are still kind of stuck in this cage of our childhoods, and a great way to start working with them is to actually have a dialogue, right? So checking in, like just like you would with your own kids. If you have children, you start to relate to this part of yourself with kindness and compassion, versus how a lot of men relate to their inner child with the same way that they were spoken to. So there's like often a tough inner critic, a lot of judgment, like you suck, get your shit together, whatever the messages we got, right? And so it's a lot of that is like changing it into positive self-talk, and once, just like if we were in like a human to human relationship, in healthy relationships, like once the person feels heard, seen, accepted, and validated, the energy shifts, right? They open, they trust you again. And just like with children also, like if they're not getting their needs met, they're going to sometimes have behavioral issues, right? They'll kind of fight, they'll resist, they'll be a pain in the ass, right? That's not really who they are. They're just trying to get their needs met, and oftentimes it's in these sort of outbursts. So our inner children can do that too, right? So that they might self-sabotage to try to get our attention in a way, you know. So that's another way of working with it, with
Gotcha.
these parts. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so a lot of what you do, it obviously plays into other areas of their life. As you mentioned the integrity, but it goes into how they approach their career, which can be very tough. It can be very, you're surrounded by other people they compare themselves to, right? The competition, or into their, if they're married in their marriage relationship, or if they're dating, even scarier, trying to develop relationships and try to figure out where they play. So that's, it's matching up against these newly defined, or the old version of masculinity. So it's constantly, I would think, constantly being tested. What they're trying to change is constantly being tested in their life. So if you could, when we talk about that, like, I know one of the things is you mentioned is dynamics. I think it's on your website, from the boardroom to the bedroom, which is like, I mean, if you're hitting two focal points for men, it's work and sex. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, it's kind of like, that's where a lot of our identity is wrapped up.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. You know, there is a lot of identity there, right? Which is not necessarily our true identity. And so, you know, a lot of, but we do get into, you know, it's easy for men to get into comparing themselves and competing. And I think one of the primary stories that even very successful men are living with internally is this story of not enoughness, right? And until that's resolved, he's always going to be competing. He's always going to be trying to prove himself. He's always going to be trying to be good enough. And that could be sexually, it could be financially. And really, it's when a man's not coming from his center, right? His truth, his integrity, his core, he's going to, you know, be measuring himself based on these external standards and be driven by external validation. And so, you know, this inner work is so crucial because, you know, we need to start to get oriented from this deeper truth, you know, and it's, you know, it's pretty much impossible if we're always being driven by this need to prove, right? Because we're in a sense abandoning where we are now, right? Because that's really the only power and capacity we have to change anything is where we are right now, you know. And even I see this even in this personal development world and coaching that I'm in, right? And it's great that men want to succeed and, you know, do better. That I am, and I'm gonna, you know, get, you know, bigger muscles or make more money or change my mindset, so finally I'll be loved and accepted. That's really what it comes down to, you know.
Right.
Like, and it's a very human need, right? Like, we all have the need to be loved and accepted the way that we are. So, you know, the primary piece of work that we have to do as men is starting with loving and accepting ourselves where we are, whatever stage of development we're on. It doesn't mean we can't have ambitions. It doesn't mean we can't have goals. We just need to start where we are, right? And not get into this comparison mode. And, you know, this, in terms of how that relates to the bedroom, you again, like men are very oriented around performance, and in some sense that's natural to our biology and
Right.
cultural evolution, right? We needed to be able to perform so that we could provide for the tribe.
Right.
And I think there's, with modern culture, there's this false sense of performance, and this is where it gets into like looking at culture as a whole, right? We live in this culture that is so fragmented in some sense that the drive to perform is not really based often on anything of real depth or meaning. We're
Mhm.
not working collectively for the needs of the tribe. We're just kind of we're in this competitive rat race against nothing really. We're not like collectively, I don't think there's a great sense of purpose, right? So it makes sense why men feel lost right now.
Right. We're all
And
individuals. We're basically working for our household or ourselves, but there's not a
right,
collective of like part of a community working towards the same goal or the same needs for survival or growth or
yeah,
whatever. There's not a community work. We're all very much separated in our own goals and drives and needs. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And we're biologically wired for community. That's how we evolved for however many thousands of years. So it's in our DNA, that need for belonging, that need to be loved and accepted, that that need for serving something bigger than ourselves. And
Right.
that's absent right now, right? And so I just want to try to tie this back into your inquiry about this how our our performance orientation, I mean, that's the best way I can put it, is like
Sure.
this need to perform really is necessary, and it holds us back simultaneously,
Mm.
because a lot of it's about where we're coming from, and if we're being pulled versus called.
Yeah, I got a nearly full house here. Sorry, including
Yeah,
a
that's fine. That's fine. No problem. So
three of the
I'm
four kids
saying,
are home, plus a dog, and it's like it's
cool.
holidays. So yeah.
Relatively quiet considering. Yes. Yeah, so part of it's like the motivating force, right? So
Right.
what is driving us, and are we being driven by our childhood wounds? Are we being driven by this seeking of validation, or are we being driven by this deep inner wisdom and connection to our our intuition, maybe a higher power? It depends on how somebody wants to hold that or see that.
Mhm.
But I find that that's really necessary, because the societal drivers are pretty shallow, and they're ultimately going to leave us feeling dissatisfied and disappointed with ourselves, because
Mm.
there's no depth to them.
Right.
you
Right.
know
So you have to find internal drivers, internal motivators, and as you said, being satisfied with yourself where you are while moving forward. So
and that's
performance
tricky. It's
moves you
kind of a
forward, but it doesn't
paradox.
cause you to be so scared that you're paralyzed to act. Is that kind of what you're saying? The balance of
Yeah, it's it's a paradox, right? Because
yeah.
on one hand, we got to be okay with where we are. On the other hand, oftentimes where we are is not really serving us, right? So how can we meet ourselves where we are with love, compassion, kindness, and say, and usually if we're able to land there, right?
Mhm.
Like there's going to be a natural, right? If we can return to that core and connect to ourselves, like we're actually going to start to be motivated by something positive,
Mm,
you know. And
gotcha. Gotcha.
but sometimes it takes time to land there.
For sure. For sure.
Mhm.
And I saw you do some group coaching. You actually have something like a tribe where you, I mean, and you mentioned um, developing relationships with other men and kind of having that feedback um, from other men as to like to reinforce, I guess, creating sense of that sense of community that you mentioned before, or the tribe, as you've called it. So how does that work with your coaching? What does that look like?
Yeah, so you know, I in my early 20s, I got into one of my first men's groups, right, which was just a group of men that got together and were able to be really honest with each other, you know,
Mm,
share things that we wouldn't normally share, maybe hadn't shared with anywhere else and
mm,
anyone else in our lives, you know, things that we had suppressed, hidden, been
mhm,
ashamed of. And just that in itself, so this is a component to the tribe, is just having a space where men can be really open and honest with each other and not need to put on this sort of persona of how we want to be perceived,
mhm,
but just show up as we are with whatever's alive for us in the moment. So that's tremendously healing. That's a gift in and of itself for a lot of guys, because you know, oftentimes past grade school, men aren't that connected with other men, you know.
right.
I mean, in terms of like heterosexual men, you know, it's different for the homosexual community, but you know, I think even in the gay community, I think men sometimes still have these walls of vulnerability, right? And that's a collective shadow, right? This idea that we need to be put together. We can't allow ourselves to be seen in our incompetency. And
Mm,
you know, it's tremendously painful. You know, a lot of men are really suffering, but they're not allowed to show it. You know, they're not
right.
allowed to say I'm hurting right now, right? Of course they're allowed to, but you know, society tells them that they're not. So right there, it's just permission for men to show up as they are. And then, you know, the modern variation of these men's groups that I run is it also has a personal development frame. So you know, because we're wired to have a direction and to compete and you know want to do stuff. It's a structure for men to get clear on what it is they want to do, to find purpose, to define their values, and to use the support of the community and the accountability of the community to take action, especially in those places where you know they've self-sabotaged in the past or held themselves back. You know, creates more accountability to be doing it in parallel to other men.
Mm,
So that's a huge piece. And then the other piece that you mentioned was feedback, right? And
right.
so often we don't have a lot of places we can go other than our intimate relationships, if you know, if we have it there, to get really honest feedback from people that see us, you know, that can maybe even see us better than we can see ourselves,
Right.
and to reflect that back in, you know, in a kind and loving way, but sometimes in a fierce way, you know, like, hey bro, like that wasn't cool, you know, you can do better than that. And you know, I see that you're holding yourself back by, you know, I don't know, treating your girlfriend that way, or staying
Mm,
in this relationship that's not serving you. So part of that feedback is like calling each other forward and up into the best version of ourselves. And that's such a potent piece of this work, is, you know, being able to not hide, right?
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's where we actually get in trouble, isn't it? When we're hiding, like you said, you call it shadow work. That's the shadow, right? That's the,
Yeah.
we refer to the
Yeah.
shadow. It's the dark
Mhm.
places that we don't let other people
Yeah,
into.
exactly.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so you start putting light in the shadow with a group of men that trust each other and
Yeah.
are accountable to each other and vulnerable with each other, so that but it's not in without the responses that we might have gotten from parents or from big brothers or whatever, where it's where someone's like poking, hey, you know, like idiot, whatever, you know, it's more of
Yeah.
a, like, no, that's not good, but let's move forward and bring and come up. So it's a more positive calling out, I guess, or more positive
Mhm.
calling to a better I guess expression of that.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, part of that comes with time, and not only being able to see each other's patterns, but to have that kind of trust, like
I would
where
imagine. Yeah.
where you know, a brother can even say things in maybe not the cleanest way. I mean, ideally it's delivered from the heart, from love, right? That's the
Right.
perfect feedback.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little clunky, right? As we learn how to do that, either way, it's going to sting a little bit, right? It's going to
Right.
sting because we're having to look at something we might not want to look at. So yeah. So and what happens though over time is we actually develop a greater capacity to receive feedback, and that's great, right? Because, you know, if we're in an intimate relationship, that carries over into the relationship. So we're able to hear feedback from a partner or a wife, right? That maybe it's not delivered in the cleanest way. You know, wives and
Right.
our girlfriends don't always do that. You know, sometimes they're pissed off, they're in pain, and
Right.
but with that capacity that's developed, we can hear her feedback without reacting to it. You know, we can take it in, maybe translate it a little bit in a way that was like, oh yeah, she's complaining because I wasn't present, or I wasn't listening, right? Or I forgot to do the thing that I said I was going to do. So you know, becomes a little bit easier with this kind of work, because oftentimes what happens for men is they go into a shame response, and then they get defensive when they feel criticized, right? So
For sure.
which is, you know, understandable, but you know, sometimes we need to be able to hold that space for each other in our partnerships, right? Where maybe they're not going to deliver something so cleanly because they're triggered, and if we can be bigger than our own pain and our own reactivity, we can receive that and not take it personally. And I just want to tie that into polarity, right? And
Please.
so this is what a lot of women need from men in terms of their masculine capacity, right? So part of masculine capacity is to be able to not take everything personally, not get so identified with the criticism, or, you know, like say she has a sexual complaint, right? Like, he touched me in a way that didn't really feel good. Um, you know, I've been through this with my partner, right? Like we can take it really personally and just have that be like a big dent on our identity. But it's, you know, really, when somebody's criticizing, they're just asking for their needs to be met.
Right.
And
Right.
and so, you know, if we can hold that without reacting, anytime we're not reacting, we're basically in our masculine, right? And that's really attractive. You know, like I could take the same feedback from my partner where, you know, she's like, oh, I didn't like it when you know, touched my arm that way. It's too light or too heavy or whatever, right? And I could shut down and go into my pout from that place, or I can just receive it, right? And just in receiving that without going into my little boy upset about it is actually going to probably end up being a turn on for her, because a lot of women just want to be able to be heard, right? And
Yes.
understood and felt and received. That's a longing from the feminine.
Mhm.
So
Without a
that
reaction.
in itself,
Without the reaction to, like, they're almost testing. Sometimes they're almost testing their boundary with you to see if how you'll respond. Like, and they're going to interpret that by how to into their interpretation of how you respond will be a determination of how you feel about them, or how much you love them, or how protected they feel with you. So you're going to interpret your response into something that most of the time we're pretty clueless about. I mean, we have no idea what's going on in their head about how we're responding. We're just responding to something that we feel like was an attack on us, or was a negative or a criticism in our own head, which, like you've mentioned, triggers back to how we respond to all other criticism, which we've learned as a kid. We're not even thinking about the fact that they're testing us. They're not thinking about the fact that they might be doing unconsciously. But that's really insightful. I mean, that you're showing that it's a, and I don't want to interrupt you, but it was just like,
no, it's good. Yeah.
That aha moment that they're testing your masculinity, and how you're going to respond to their expression, or their emotional expression, or their vulnerability. And are you going to shut down? Are you going to attack them back in their vulnerable moment? Or are you just going to be very still and strong and able to handle the criticism and listen without a negative response?
Yeah, I mean, that's a game changer.
That point alone could save relationships.
Yeah. No, it's huge. It's really huge. And that's where that awareness comes in, right? Like, as we start to know our own triggers and reactions, and we can watch ourselves, we can be the witness, which, in some more like esoteric lenses, like Tantra, right? The masculine is the witness, it's awareness itself, right? So the more that we can rest in awareness, and the feminine is energy, it's movement, it's change, it's emotion, it's reaction, it's all of that, right? So can we just watch what's happening and hang out there and still be in the moment? Can we hold the energy of the moment, the energy of that's happening in the relational dynamic, without getting pulled into our own feminine, which is our own emotional response? Not to say we can't have emotions, right? But are we being driven by them?
Right. Are we residing in them? Are we reacting to them?
Yeah. Do we have consciousness around our emotions? Because even in that moment, we can say, "Oh, that hurt," right? Which is owning our emotional experience, which is important in a healthy relationship. But are we acting from the hurt?
Right. By attacking back, or as you said, withdrawing, or self-medicating, and whatever we do to self-medicate. Self-medicate.
Yeah.
Wow. That must take a great deal of self-awareness.
It does. Yeah. And we all fall off the horse with it, but sure. This is why I really emphasize practice as a foundation of our work as men, because it cultivates that awareness. And so it's, not only meditative practice, but, learning how to process our emotions in a healthy way, so that we become emotionally current. We're not still carrying the charge of past experiences, but that, like, our emotions are not cloudy, right? They're clear, and we can bring them in a healthy way. But also embodied practice, so exercise in it itself is great, and it will help a man to feel more grounded and embodied in a certain sense. But the more mindfully it's done, right? So the more like, this is why I love practices like qigong and yoga, right? Because they're done with intention. And not all yoga is, but the aspect of bringing the breath into it. That's why also all meditation has an emphasis on the breath. So breath is huge. It's what helps us to stay emotionally present, right? Where it helps us. It's in yoga is a great metaphor for anybody that's done it, right? Like you're in an intense pose, you're feeling a lot of sensation, right? And so part of the yoga practice is can you stay present with the sensation? Can you breathe, and can you stay open even in the intensity? And so that could be what's happening in a conflict, right? Are you breathing and are you open in this conflict?
So managing the autonomic nervous system, in that you, instead of going to fight or flight, you're staying, maybe some nasal breathing. So basically you're staying, you said, in the moment, you're staying calm, you're controlling, you can actually assess the situation for what it is, rather than the fight, as we just mentioned, fight or flight, attack or withdraw. That's where most of us would go. If you can stay in a breath under stress, like in yoga or in exercise or whatever it is you're doing, practice that intention. That's the word that came to my mind too when you said that, intentional calmness or awareness and presence. So you're not floating away, you're not trying to put it out of mind, but you're really feeling it and yet remaining still, in a sense. Is that where am I interpreting that correctly? Okay, so I'm thinking in terms of
100%.
my physical, practice with breathing and nasal breathing and trying to feel exactly what I'm doing and going deeper into fatigue and so forth, but while still maintaining some level of without going too great into fight or flight, to control that. And so that's to do that in an emotional or a relationship. I mean, that it makes sense. It's like, if we can do that in one area of our life, you're saying it translates. So it's like, because exercise helps us do hard things, or helps us to overcome things. It shows us we can overcome things. That practice you're referring to, which you would do outside of the conflict, the relationship conflict, translates into how we can handle a relationship conflict.
Yeah, 100%. Because if you think about it, like with exercise and with emotion, it's not exactly the same, but what's happening with an emotional reaction is you're feeling intense sensation, right? You're feeling sensation in the body when you're having an emotional response.
For sure.
Same thing when you're doing an intense workout. It's a lot of sensation in the body, right? So can we stay regulated in those moments of intense sensation, to put it simply?
Not tune out, not run away, not overreact, but say regulate is a great word for it. Because that's how easy is it to be triggered in those moments. Awesome.
And I just want to say one other piece, like this is
absolutely,
it's hard for men because we're directional. So part of that directional masculine orientation is to want to get to the end of things, right? So I just want to be over. I want to finish this workout. I'm waiting for this conflict to end. I'm waiting for it to shut up.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's almost, I think, sometimes an anxiety that can be coming from that place of like, all right, let's just get on with it. Like, come on, shut up. Like, so that masculine response is, can you be with what's here? Not to say you can't usher in a little bit of direction, right? That's kind of a next stage. But number one, as a masculine presence, it's learning how to be with what is.
Not be so quick to try to resolve, but let's just be here. Let's be present. Awareness, acknowledging, which women really want, is that acknowledgement from us to be that they've been heard and understood. That's huge. we can be calm long enough to acknowledge and let them know they're understood and heard. Huge. So it dissipates so much conflict right there. because sometimes that's all they're asking for, and we don't always hear that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been married for 23 and a half years. So, and I had to learn the hard way,
Nice,
like,
man. That's
and
huge,
then
man. I just
so it's
want to
always
celebrate
learning.
that.
What's that?
Yeah. I just want to celebrate 23 and a half years. That's quite a journey.
It's quite a journey of learning. I mean, constantly
Yeah.
learning and becoming more aware. And it's like, it's still like get hit between the eyes sometimes with my own, poor reactions, but understanding that, the differences between men and women, which you explain, which in how, in our energy and how we're supposed to respond, and what's expected or what's needed in that moment. That's a great, because we aren't the same. We don't express ourselves the same way. We don't create solutions the same way. But you just express that polarity in a very, very eloquently, because it shows you said the energy and the strength. It's like you've got, you're dealing with, you have to show a calmness to be trusted with the intimacy. And if she can't trust you with that intimacy, you're probably not going to get more intimacy very well, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to get which is what we crave, which is the resolution, or as so many men are, feel so much more validation through physical intimacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to create that trust there, so that is on the emotional side of it, and letting be heard and understood. I think to get to where what most men are, generally looking for their resolve, but that physical intimacy to be so much more powerful and meaningful. And I think, not that that's the 100%. End goal every time, but I'm saying it's like that trust is built in those moments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those, those little moments are, a lot of men have desires to like have crazy, kinky, wild sexual experiences, right? So the more that we can, hold space for these experiences and build, like you said, that trust. So much of it's about safety, like women open when they feel safe, right? And so if she can't even trust you to hold her emotional experience around like not taking out the garbage, right? Then why is she going to want to open up sexually to you?
Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And that's, I think, I mean, that should be the conversation with every man before he enters, I mean, like as a teenage boy, and certainly reminded of before he enters a relationship, and reminded again before he gets married. And, like, because we're a little thick-skulled, but to understand that that's the role, is to create a safety and a relationship of trust in communication, in these little things. That's unfortunately something a lot of us had to learn the hard way, isn't it?
I learned it the hard way too many times. Too many failed relationships. And I want to address one thing on this topic, because I think it's important where men are at right now, because here's the thing, like, men also need to feel safe. Men also have emotional needs, right? And men also do need to be validated and acknowledged. And here's the value of like tying in like a men's group and a men's community to the impact on polarity, right? So if a man puts all of that responsibility for his need for safety, his need for validation, his need to be heard and seen on his partner, it will likely depolarize the relationship, because he's, not to say he shouldn't seek that out to some degree, but if if he shows up like really full and being the space rather than asking her to be the space or the container to hold him, it's going to create that charge, right? And so having a container that can hold you as a man, like a men's group where you can open up and be vulnerable, like, yes, that's important. You do need to express your feelings and have a safe place where you can do that. Partner often. And a lot of men might complain about that and say that's not fair, things aren't balanced, like, why do I have to do this for her but she doesn't have to do this for me? And my response to that is, like, if you want to have a really balanced relationship, it's going to impact your sexual polarity, and so there's a natural, I wouldn't say it's a balance, but that's what polarity is. It's based on like a positive charge and a negative charge, just like on two magnets, right? And so if you have two magnets of the same charge coming towards each other, they're going to kind of not be attracted. So same thing with sexual polarity. And so if you want a relationship that just feels like a roommate or a best friend, then share everything, right? But you're probably not going to have a lot of sexual chemistry from that place. So that's just something to consider. It's like, what do you want to create? And not to say that isn't beautiful or amazing in certain ways, but if space where you can process some of your stuff and show up more open and clear and able to hold her, you're going to create more of that polarity.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So basically, where she is not dealing with a needy man, essentially, that's kind of what you're saying, where his emotional needs are not being met solely by her, because that's more of a feminine need, I guess, or that where you want her to trust you to be that for her, but if you flip it, you're going to lose the, like you said, the sexual polarity. So I'm just kind of unpacking it, even for myself, but for other people listening who maybe haven't understood that, because I think that's an incredible concept that's been diluted or lost, and that it's not stoicism, but yet it's about where do you place your how are your emotional needs dealt with? It's not that you don't have emotional needs or that you don't deal with your emotional needs or your vulnerabilities, but it's where they are they're met with someone of similar strength or greater, and dumping that on your partner is going the wrong direction. She wants to be desired, but not needy, not having a needy man and not be needed. So I guess, like, she doesn't want to be your mother. She wants to be the one you're protecting her. She's not trying to protect you, I guess. Is that, I don't want to misstate what you're saying. I just want to unpack it. No, that's a tremendous concept to understand.
It is. And it's, it's tricky because, in our politically correct world right now, like, some people have a hard time with gender roles, right? And to some degree that's understandable. I think there's a pivot and a shift that's important and necessary. And really again, this is about, like, what kind of relationship you want to create. It's like laws of nature. So it's not so much about preference or what's better. It's just like, what do you want to have? And if you think, like, in the old days, if a man like had a tribe, he didn't have this like monogamous thing that was there for him to get all of his needs met. had elders, he had mentors, he had, all the men that he went out to hunt with, and, they would talk about their stuff. And so
Right.
you wouldn't, come back from work with all your stress and your pain and whatever's unprocessed from your childhood, and then, be like, take care of me, my love. Right. So
Exactly.
it's just a different quality of relationship. And I also just want to say, like, it's okay for men to have needs, right? And I think this is where this gets misinterpreted, and then men end up reverting back to the stoic, I don't need anything, shut down version of a guy. That's not what we're going for here.
Right.
You can even bring your needs to your partner in a way that she can receive a lot easier. And that's where they're not coming with an expectation, but they're just be like, hey, my love, I would really appreciate it if you could just, stroke my chest right now. Like, I'm just feeling kind of, sad from something that happened at work. Right. And that could actually be really sexy for her. Like, that could still have polarity. So it doesn't mean you're showing up in the relationship completely needless. It's just how it's packaged, how your needs are packaged. It's like packaged versus dumped.
Right. Yeah. You're not unloading all your fears on her. You're not unloading all of your insecurities on it. You're just saying, hey, I just need some affirmation, but in a context that doesn't cause her stress or fear. Basically, it doesn't relay your stress or fears into her or onto her. It's just like, it's a connectivity. It's like, let's just connect and that'll make me feel better. It's more about connection than unloading your junk. Am I okay?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's different forms of needs.
Different forms
for
of
that
it,
example.
right?
Yeah.
Right, because we are very physical beings.
Yeah, that goes a long way. Like, one of my favorite things is to have my belly rubbed.
Okay, interesting. Well, hey, at least you know it. Like, a lot of us don't even know what that would be, what it is. A lot of us are not aware enough to understand how to handle that situation. So it's like, you've discovered that. That's fantastic. I want to be conscious of your time, because I know you've got clients to take care of.
Yeah.
But I want to tell people how to get a hold of you, what you've got going on. I know your website is theessentialman.net, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And then I know I found you on Instagram, which is at the.essential.man. And I'll put that in the show notes. And you're on YouTube as well, correct? Yeah, YouTube channel.
I'm working on it. Not a whole lot going on there, but a few things floating.
Okay. And then you have something coming up in January, right?
Yeah, I've got a really powerful program that I'm leading with a colleague of mine coming up in January, and it's called the Masculine Reset. So it touches on a lot of the subject matter that came up on this call. So the first aspect of it is basically creating a context where we take all these dissociative mechanisms that we have in our lives and take them off the table for a period of time. So it's going to be a 12-week program. So yeah, let's say you have a pornography addiction or habit, or you're on all these dating apps, or maybe you smoke weed consistently, whatever your thing is, right? We're going to sanction off a period of time where that's not engaged in, and then we're going to, as a tribe, as a group, we're going to work through and give you support tools to work with what's there, what comes up in the absence of these escape mechanisms, and learning how to be with yourself, learning how to, number one, training your attention and presence to be with yourself first, right? Because then you can then learn how to be with others from that deep, centered, grounded, masculine place. So it's going to be quite a powerful program.
Wow. Okay. I'll have the link to that in the show notes as well. I've got the link to that. It's theessentialman.net /reset. So I'll make sure that direct link is to that, so people can
Awesome.
get more information
Yeah.
about that. That's coming up. A great way to start the new year. If
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
like I mean, people are trying to do it with resolutions, but you're talking about with accountability in a men's group. Let's set
Yeah.
aside something and then replace it with something positive, rather than just create a resolution that gets kind of forgotten. So that's a great way to start the year. Thank you, Soma. I appreciate this. A lot of incredible nuggets in this that I think people can
Yeah.
run with. But I encourage people to reach out and check out your blog and check you out on social media and get in contact for more, because that's so needed, so missing. I mean, why go in lost? I mean, like you said, we go into these relationships not really knowing how to handle them. We probably didn't have great examples set for us always, you know, growing up. And to have a brotherhood that can help you walk through it and make you more settled and powerful in that, in who you're supposed to be and in your purpose. And that's it's completely lost beyond just not having a community, but we're just so separated, where Zoom is the face-to-face, you know, connection of the moment. It's we lose a lot. But anyway,
Mm.
I want to thank you again. I appreciate your time and all that you've shared, and I look forward to digging into more of your stuff, because I certainly I've got some things I've got to review as well for my own benefit.
Yeah, cool. We can always do another conversation sometime down the road if you want. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. I enjoyed that, Zane. Thanks for having me.